So I've shown my support on the show many times for the Defend the Guard movement. The big high level for Mr. Dum Dum here, his descriptor of it, is we want to make sure the New Hampshire National Guard, overall across the country, but specifically for New Hampshire, that our National Guard is not sent overseas to fight wars unless Congress specifically puts us into a state of war. The Defend the Guard movement wants to keep our troops here in the United States to be able to do things like emergency preparedness, assist with flooding, go to the border if there's huge amounts of migrants going to the border. Imagine something like that happening. I couldn't imagine that happening in our country. Joined today by Dexter Tarbox. Welcome back.
Hi, AJ.
All right, so I want to show up this letter. So this has been, Defend the Guard bill has been brought up. It's HB229, and unfortunately, it has been pushed over to committee. So, which is extremely unfortunate. That means it's basically in limbo until someone on the committee decides that it doesn't need to be. So this is an alert put up today. It's April 24th from Bring Our Troops Home, which is the organization that's kind of the nationwide push for Defend the Guard. Liberty activist groups and veterans organizations, in collaboration with multiple legislatures, have released a public letter reprimanding the New Hampshire Senate's imposition of interim study on HB 229, the Defend the Guard Act. This action abandons New Hampshire Guardsmen by killing progress on the bill this session, all without a roll call by members. They're betraying their oaths, and they're scared of accountability. And Tom Representative Mannion is right there at the top. He's been on the show. Derek Prue, who's from AFP, and I don't know, he hasn't been on the show yet, but good guy. New Hampshire Liberty, like there's all sorts of liberty-oriented people on this, and this is ridiculous in my opinion. This should be a no-brainer, but it really, if I had to guess, this is coming down to bureaucracy more than anything else. This comes down to the feds going, you're going to lose all your funding. The brass, so this went over to on the House side, was brought up in committee, and there was a very good discussion on it, and it looked good until the generals and the people that hit the pencil pushers said, we're going to lose money and we're not going to be able to afford to have our National Guard funded appropriately, when there's no evidence systemically that they're doing anything except for saying, hey, we're going to take your funding, but they're probably not going to do it because they want the National Guard to be effective at each state because it's a huge backbone to the U.S. military.
I mean, and I'm just reacting to this letter for the first time now, but one of the things that strikes me is that maybe it was a tad unfortunate to even start that tweet. I haven't read the whole letter with liberty activists, because I do think that casts it in a certain light. In New Hampshire in particular, sort of a free state libertarian light, which is often controversial in the state, when to me this seems like just a question of protecting the original intentions of the Constitution in terms of the declaration of war and when we should submit our state troops to that effort. So to me, it seems, I agree, a completely straightforward argument. And I don't think it needs to be colored politically or in an activist way at all, simply because it is, in fact, so direct an affirmation of what the founders intended.
I don't get why Democrats aren't all about this bill. Like, fundamentally, Democrats from 20 years ago would have been like, yeah, no kidding, this should have been done forever ago. But this mob mentality of New Hampshire Democrats is so... It goes against their own ideology, in my opinion, because they're focused on strictly the LGBTQ issues. Nothing else matters at all. So this fundamental thing for the alleged anti-war group, they're like, no, we don't support this bill.
I think it goes against what we would consider as their traditional ideology of the left. There seems to have been, and I think this is symptomatic of the major reversal that we've seen in terms of where liberals and conservatives respectively stand on foreign wars, where we have seen the left more actively engaging and supporting our funding, and even physically supporting foreign wars, is a total reversal from what we'd seen in the past. And I think that's represented here because, yeah, if we're thinking about Democrats, liberals in their traditional positions, they should absolutely support this. You'd think, in fact, they would be some of the greatest champions of it. And now we're seeing, of course, the exact opposite.
And just off the top of my head, think of the projects that the National Guard could be doing in our state that are just not feasible because we're too busy sending them elsewhere. We sent a handful of troops over to the border. Senior reporter Emery Timmons from New Hampshire Bulletin is actually down there at Eagles Pass covering this. I got to get her on the show when she comes back. She already had one article on at NewHampshireBulletin.com on it. And the thing about it, we were just talking about another segment about homelessness. Like, why aren't we directing these engineers and people that have physical ability to do things to go construct housing, to go work on the infrastructure of our state? Because guess what? If our infrastructure fails, that's a huge security risk to our state. Let alone the issues at the northern border. Like, we've. The stats, unfortunately, don't support it because I think it's literally impossible to get proper stats for the northern border in New Hampshire because it's woods and there's nothing there. But anecdotally, people who have houses up there are always talking about, it's like, oh yeah, it's a constant stream of people going through. We just try not to acknowledge them so they leave us alone.
The U.S.-Canadian border is the largest continuous border between any two countries in the world, I believe. I mean, of course, it's porous. Yeah. As you said, it's massive, and it's the woods.
Yeah, we need to consider, like, I really hate not having the numbers. I always push, like, we need the data in order to make decisions. It kills me, but when we look at the feasibility of the situation, like there, it's obvious that this is going to be a very porous situation. I grew up in rural Maine. You go up north, and I mean, there's nothing for hours when you drive around. You'll go past a little Andover, Maine. It's like, oh, there's 100 people live here, and you keep going, and it's like, oh, it's woods again forever, and you could just go over the border, we don't need our National Guard overseas. If they're that desperate for recruitment of soldiers, that's a fundamental problem the Army and the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force need to fix on their own. They should not be able to piggyback off of our people here that joined what they thought was going to be for the good of the within the borders of the United States and not going overseas. It's just fundamentally terrible.
I think there are even more fundamental issues when we look at the types of wars that we have potential for entering into right now. They're reminiscent in many ways of World War I, in that they are all triggered by peacetime treaty arrangements, is what it seems like, essentially. So these are wars for which we have a very tenuous, or to which we have a very tenuous in which we have a very tenuous national interest, let me say. I know that there are many, even on the right, who would disagree with that. I think they're wrong. But certainly when the debate is as large as it is right now about the nature of our even financial engagement in many of these conflicts, the idea of potentially sending our National Guardsmen to go and fight in these wars, should they break out, seems beyond absurd. As you say, it's not what they signed up for, and it's certainly not the best use of their talents and their skills. I mean, we do have tremendous engineers and very intelligent and effective people who could be doing service to the state, who would be completely diverted to a cause which, I'll say again, I think, if we're looking at what's possible right now, would be an ultimately foolish cause to engage in.
Going back to the letter, I mean, the primary objection to HB229 is the false threat that the federal government would withhold federal funding for the National Guard in response to passage. Multiple members of Congress have publicly confirmed this is an impossibility, while no member of Congress, White House official, or senior military officers ever made an on-the-record statement they would support defunding the Guard. No one wants to pull funding of the National Guard.
Who's behind these threats? Is there a letter that's been published? Is it anyone? Yeah. Or
No,
is this, as we were joking earlier, is this Lindsey Graham sending a message to someone?
It's mean letters being sent to people off the record, not really talking about it. I believe from the hearing from the House, I can't remember. There were a couple generals and a couple other people on there saying that, well, we're at risk of losing such and such. Well, risk is very much in the eye of the beholder when you're talking about federal monies, which are astronomical. And I mean, ultimately, if it came down to it, where they're really going to pull their funding, I'm pretty sure we have the surplus to kind of support some of this. And generally speaking, Granite Staters would come together to make sure their National Guard had the funding they needed to do their job.
And think about what other federal program is there that has such a quid pro quo as that would imply. Say that unless you commit yourself to going to war for us, an undeclared war, a war, let's say in quotes, to go to a police action for us abroad at any essentially random time, because again, there won't be a declaration, it won't be Congress deciding this, but at the whim of the executive branch. And if you do not commit yourself to that hazard, we'll deny you federal funding. What other federal program has so much of a tit for tat?
Yeah, I mean,
I can't think of any.
It makes me think of they're trying to pull the old, we're going to pull your funding like they do for like highways and things like that if you don't have certain speed limits. But they would have pulled that card if they had that card. That card has not been pulled. Like, it's been mean letters instead of saying that RSA blah-de-blah point B390 purple is going to be defunct because you decided to do this. It's BS.
And it's a much less substantial card, even in that case. I mean, there is no federal drinking age in the United States. It's through highway funding, essentially, under Carter in the first place, where we essentially established it nationally at 21 by denying states who wouldn't raise it to that age highway funding. That to me, though, seems even there a lot less of an important trade-off than to send your men to war.
Yeah, we should have a lot more sway than that.
Yeah. We'll deny you, supplemental funding to your state DOT if you don't raise your drinking age versus we're not going to fund your National Guard if you won't commit yourself to potentially ludicrous foreign adventures. It's a much bigger ask. And I don't think precedented in any of these other cases of federal funding where they require something from us. So I hope it's an empty threat, and I hope it's something that we can get past.
Definitely. Well, I gotta say, I'm not usually the activist type, but call your senator, call the governor, put in messages, harass them to no end. We should have control over our National Guard. If there's no declaration of war, we should keep our troops home. Harass the crap out of everyone you can that's in the Senate and in the executive branch to make sure that this gets the push home that it needs to have, because this should not sit in committee.
And if it is that it only is right now stuck in committee, being the barrier, calling, writing letters could be effective. I don't think that would be an ineffective measure. I think it's worth reaching out at the stage this legislation is in.
All right, at Defend the Guard on Twitter or at Defend Guard NH. Definitely follow those accounts. They get all the latest on it. Americans for Prosperity is behind it. Like, there's all sorts of great organizations that think this is a good idea. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Really consider what is at hand with this law. All right, NewEnglandTake.com. Like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.